Mansa Musa, or the King of Gold, as some people call him, is an African Muslim king, and some consider him to be the richest person who lived on earth. But this is not true, and it is likely that Qarun, who lived at the time of the prophet Moses, is the richest man who lived on earth, and we talked about his story and his tragic end in a previous video entitled "The Richest Man Ever Known." In this video, I will mention the reasons that Qarun is likely to be richer than Mansa Musa. But first, who is Mansa Musa? Mansa is an African title that means sultan, while the name of this African Muslim king is Musa. Mansa Musa ruled the kingdom of Mali. He is considered one of the greatest rulers in the history of ancient African kingdoms. Historical sources state that Mansa Musa was a just ruler. He loved science, education, and construction, which is why many architectural structures are attributed to him, especially mosques in the ancient city of Timbuktu, the greatest ancient Islamic city on the African continent. The era of Mansa Musa is considered the golden age of the history of the ancient kingdom of Mali. He was known as the King of Gold because he was the king who controlled all the gold mines in West Africa in his time. Mansa Musa also controlled the gold trade and the markets where African gold was sold, and there is no doubt that the gold trade was one of the most profitable types of trade. West African merchants used to exchange gold with foreign merchants, especially those coming from North Africa, and thus Arab and Berber merchants had a major role in the prosperity of this trade across the paths of the Sahara Desert. They would go to the major gold markets, especially in Timbuktu, and they would carry with them salt extracted from Mauritania to exchange this salt for gold. It is known that African merchants were very interested in salt, as they were indispensable for the lack of salt in their countries, and that is why this trade was known as the salt and gold trade, and it was sometimes carried out in a barter manner, so that surprisingly the sulba was bartered for its weight in gold metal. Mansa Musa wanted to make a pilgrimage. He went out in a golden procession to the pilgrimage, and this procession included thousands of pilgrims and was preceded by about 500 slaves from the African king's servants. It has also been said each slave carried a huge piece of pure gold. He also carried loads of gold on the backs of camels in his procession. Mansa Musa began his pilgrimage until he arrived in Cairo after a long and arduous journey from his country that took several months. Cairo was one of the most important pilgrimage stations for African kings since ancient times, and their stop in Cairo was to wait for the exit of the Egyptian Hajj procession, which was supervised by the state at that time and was led by one of the princes in the Egyptian court. Mansa Musa went to discover the markets of the flourishing city of Cairo, and he was very impressed by them. Cairo was then the jewel of the East and the great capital of Islam during the rule of the Mamluks. Mansa Musa bought many goods and things he needed from the markets of Cairo, and he even overpurchased and lavished on it. It is said that the price of gold at that time in Cairo was much lower because of what the Sultan of Mali spent in its markets. He was seen by some merchants coming from Europe with the aim of trading in the Egyptian markets, and the Europeans were impressed by the wealth of this king and the gold he had with him, so they sent home urgently about the richness of this king in gold. And then the European plans began to be prepared hastily, and the eyes of European colonizers began to turn toward the lands of gold in West Africa. Thus, it was Mansa Musa's procession that drew the attention of European colonizers towards Africa and its riches, led by the Portuguese and Spaniards. But is Mansa Musa really the richest man who ever lived? Here it is, worth noting that the story of Qarun is mentioned in the Quran only, And he lived a long time ago, before even the birth of Christ, so he's not as famous and known as Mansa Musa, especially to non-Muslims who have not read the Quran. It is also worth noting that the one who testified to Qarun's great wealth is God himself, as he said in the Quran that the keys of Qarun's treasuries were not able to be carried by a group of strong men. If the keys were so, you can imagine the amount of his money. In my opinion, the most important point that suggests that Qarun is the richest person who lived on the earth is that he was neither a king nor a sultan, so everything he owned was only his own, while Mansa Moses was a king, and he was controlling the money of the state and its gold mines and trade, and therefore he cannot be compared to Qarun, because Qarun was a person and Mansa Moses was a state. In the end, if you want to consider Mansa Moses to be the richest person who lived on earth, you are free to do so, because there is no undeniable evidence that Qarun is richer than him, just as there is no undeniable evidence that Mansa Moses is the richest. Greetings to you. See you soon.